All right, I think we are live on
Yeah.
YouTube now. Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the 19th International Primatology Lecture on Past, Present, and Future Perspectives of the Field. I'm Susumu Tamiya of the Center for International Collaboration and Advanced Studies in Primatology at Kyoto University. In this lecture series, we ask distinguished primatologists and wildlife scientists from across the globe to share with us their personal stories of how their professional careers have developed and in relation to the important scientific discoveries they have made. Perspectives on where they think the fields of primatology and wildlife science should be headed next, and finally, some advice for early career scientists, including some of our graduate students. You can watch the previous lectures on this series on SciCast YouTube channel. And after today's lecture, there will be time for Q&A. So whether you are watching this on Zoom or YouTube, please feel free to add your comments and questions on the chat board during the lecture. So now I'd like to hand over the mic to Dr. Michael Huffman to introduce today's speaker, Professor Patrícia Izar.
Thanks, Susumu. Well, I'd like to welcome all of you again to this lecture series. Thanks for coming early in the morning to listen to this. Some of you in other parts of the world, maybe in the evening, like it is for Pat. But all of you are very welcome, and we really appreciate your watching this lecture series. It's a really great pleasure to have Pat join us today. We've been in contact for off and on for quite some time through journal reviews and different processes like that. And I'm very much aware of the work she's done, but I've probably never heard her actually speak in person. So this is an exciting moment for me, and I think you'll all really enjoy what she has to share. Coming from my chimpanzee perspective, when I was first starting, there was a lot of hype about chimpanzee tool use and how advanced they were, and they're the best model for human evolution of tool use. But when I started learning more about the work that the Capuchin researchers have been doing, earlier in the series we had Elisabetta Weisselberghi, and she shared some of her work. She's a good friend and a close collaborator with Pat, so I think we'll learn a lot more about Capuchin tool use today. But in my mind, the work that this group in Brazil has been doing is incredible. It really outshines the research on chimpanzee tool use, I think, because they've gone into it so much more deeply and looked at issues that just chimp researchers haven't done yet. So I think we all have a lot to learn from the work that they're doing. And today is the day that we hear from Pat. So I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Mike, for this presentation. Thank you, Susumu, and Andrew also for all the help here. I'm very excited to be with you virtually. So I will share my screen now.
Yeah, you're good.
Just one quick question to Susumu. I have this share sound checked, so it's working, right, for the sound?
It should.
Okay. So good morning to everyone there. Good night if there are some Brazilians watching here. It's night now. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Mike, again for the invitation to be part of this series of lectures. I'm very honored. I wish I was there with you in Japan, in Kyoto. I visited Kyoto in 2010 for the IPS meeting held there, and I loved Kyoto and Japan. And I went to Japan again to a pre-congress in 2014. And I am really fascinated by this country, by Japan, and I hope I can go back there one day in person, not only virtually. And well, let's go to the lecture. The title of my lecture today is On Causes and Consequences of Tool Use, Lessons Learned from Wild Capuchin Monkeys. And let me show you a little movie. We are seeing here a Cascudo. He is the current dominant male of, he's an adult male birded Capuchin monkey. Is it working?
Yeah.
And or macaco prego, as we say in Portuguese. Capuchin monkey in Portuguese is macaco prego. Cascudo is crack opening a hard palm nut using a hammerstone as a tool. Cascudo is the current, as I said, he's the current dominant male of a wild group of Capuchin monkeys, of course, that lives in this area, the Fazenda Boa Vista. Fazenda Boa Vista is an area located in the north. Do you see my arrow here? Can you see? Yeah. Fazenda Boa Vista is located in the northeastern region of Brazil, in the city of Gil Bués, in the Piauí state. What's important here to show to you, it's more or less in this region. This is the ecotone between the Cerrado and the Caatinga. And this, as you can see in this picture, and also in this one, and this one, these are the open woodland savanna-like Brazilian biomes. And I'm showing this picture in this Cerrado area in the region of Gil Bués in Fazenda Boa Vista. It's the transition with the Caatinga, which is in fact the semi-arid habitat in biome in Brazil. So it's a very dry Cerrado, and I wanted to show this to you because sometimes when we think about Brazil, monkeys in Brazil, people think about the tropical forest, the Amazonia and the Atlantic forest, and this is a very different area, as you can see here. I first visited this area in 2003 with doctors Dorothy Fragazzi and Elisabetta Wieselberg that Mike mentioned before, my colleagues, and today my very dear friends. And with them and with the collaboration of the Oliveira family, we established this already long-term project that we call the Ethocebus or Ethocebus to investigate the ecological, social, cognitive, and developmental factors associated to tool use in this population. And I will talk about it today, all these findings. But I want to emphasize that this talk today, my talk today, is only possible due to this long-term collaboration among 3 women scientists and all that it's involved about being 3 women, one in United States, another one in Italy, and another one in Brazil. And also with students from all over the world, not only our countries, but we had students from China, from Israel, from India, and with the local community that allowed us to build a long-term database that indeed revolutionized our knowledge on non-human tool use. First, I think it's important to emphasize that my talk today is on robust Capuchin monkeys. This is a group of 8 biogeographic species that belong to the genus Sapajos. This genus, as you can see here in this map, presents a wide geographic distribution almost all over South America, from Amazonia and Atlantic forest, Cerrado, Caatinga, Pantanal, and so they occupy these different biomes that present distinct ecological features, and they present corresponding behavioral variation in relation to these different ecological features in many behavioral domains, from body posture and locomotion, more bipedal, more when they walk more on the ground, also in their navigation systems and in their social systems. But for the purpose of our talk today, I want to highlight their great variation in feeding behavior. Capuchin monkeys are omnivorous primates. They include a wide variety of items to complement their preferential frugivory, including meat, but they vary not only in the types of foods, the items they eat, but also in their diet composition. So they are mainly frugivorous, but in some populations, they are more insectivorous, and others, they are even more folivorous than others. But most importantly, again, for what we are talking today, they can extract foods that are inaccessible for most vertebrates, such as the heart of palm trees, as we can see here, Sapajos nigritus, the species that I study in the Atlantic forest that I'm not talking about today, but they are able to extract the leaves of the palms and eat the heart of the palms. And of course, they can use tools to crack open hard foods, including crabs and oysters, as we can see in these pictures here from the mangrove in Maranhão state. We first described the customary use of stone tools in Fazenda Boa Vista in 2004, in this paper of 2004. And you can see in this map here, this is the Piauí state, and Gilboés, Fazenda Boa Vista is here, where we first published this report. Right after our publication, Antonio Moura and Phyllis Lee published another report here in Serra da Capivara. So Gilboés, in Fazenda Boa Vista in Gilboés, and Serra da Capivara in São Raimundo Nonato, more or less 3 kilometers apart. So is this something about Piauí state? After these first descriptions, that at that time were super surprising. It was really something that everybody was, oh my God, a platyhine primate using tools. Oh, we never heard about it. It was not known from scientists that they were using tools in nature. And after that, these first descriptions, other reports were published. And today we know that several populations along the central portion of the distribution of the genus Sapajos use tools. But up to now, these reports that are here with these triangles and stars, all these reports belong or are restricted to 3 species: Sapajos libidinosos, as I mentioned, as in Fazenda Boa Vista, Sapajos flavius, and Sapajos xanthosternos. So among the 8 species, 3 are reported to use tools. So this could indicate a genetic condition for tool use. Fortunately, these 3 species, in particularly Flavius and xanthosternos, they occur in the more shady and open biomes of Cerrado and Caatinga, but also in areas of forest. Flavius and xanthosternos indeed are species of Atlantic forest that reach areas of Cerrado and Caatinga. And the forest populations of these species do not use tools. At least there are no reports, albeit intensive surveys have been conducted. Eduardo Toni and I reviewed this evidence in this paper published in 2008, and our conclusions still hold true. We suggested that the evidence at that time, and it's still true, favors the idea that environmental features, rather than cognitive differences among species, are related to the emergence of tool use in certain populations. Indeed, in a more recent review comparing long-term studies on 7 populations of 4 species of sapajos that use tools and do not use tools, Briseida Rezende, Renata Ferreira, and I addressed existing hypotheses to explain variation in the occurrence of tool use among primate populations. More traditionally, feeding tools have been considered a strategy for extracting embedded foods in conditions of food scarcity. Tools would be a feeding adaptation to the necessity of finding alternative foods. It's called the necessity hypothesis. Later, the idea that tool use would be associated to availability of time and to a higher degree of group cohesion, which are more common features, more commonly associated to food abundance, was introduced. This is called the opportunity hypothesis. By comparing our 7 populations, Briseida, Renata, and I, we found evidence that tool use is associated to higher food availability. So we found populations that do not use tools and have a lower food availability than the populations that use tools, and also related to the availability of encased foods, favoring the opportunity hypothesis. In the same line, in our study population of Fazenda Boa Vista, we analyzed tool use in relation to food availability. This was the PhD of Noemi Spagnaletti. We compared the frequency of tool use between 2 groups, one of which was slightly provisioned with palm nuts and corn, and the other one was not provisioned. And between the dry and the wet season. In fact, we conducted correlations with rainfall. There, the rainfall is really different between the dry season is really dry, 0 rainfall, and the wet season. So we did not find, there was no difference between the 2 groups, provision and non-provision, and between seasons, there was no correlation with rainfall in the frequency of tool use. The only correlation we found, let me put my glasses to show you correctly here, the only positive correlation that we found it was between tool use in the non-provision group and the availability of the more abundant nut, the Catoulet nut, that this group used to crack. Again, favoring the opportunity hypothesis. Now, turning to other findings, our research also contributed to the study of tool cognition in primates in general. In 2004, when Dori and Elisa and also Linda Fedigan, they published the complete Capuchin, a book that summarized everything we knew about the Sebini. The state of the art on tool use at that time by Capuchin monkeys was based on laboratory studies with captive raised monkeys. The general conclusion was that tool use was a chance outcome due to their manipulative and curious and very active behavior. But there was no evidence that the monkeys perceived what was important in materials and actions to achieve the success. And I quote them in the book. They said, from the representational perspective, Capuchins do not appear to understand why and how certain familiar conditions, such as a hole in the surface, influence the way an object moves across a surface. This affirmation was already challenged by our first studies based on naturalistic observation that strongly suggested Capuchins were selecting particular stones to use as tools. Using survey techniques, we analyzed the features of the stones the monkeys used as anvils and as hammers and compared with random stones available in the area. We analyzed the type of the stone, the friability, weight, surface dimensions, and height above the ground. We discovered the monkeys preferred flat surfaces for anvils, including some woody anvils, as we can see here in this picture. They use much more stone anvils, but some woody anvils as well. And they preferred hard quartzite stones as hammers. We also verified that suitable anvils are relatively common in the area, but suitable hammers are rare. These river pebbles are rare in the region. And indeed, again, still with the naturalist observation, we observed that the monkeys transport the hammer stones over at least small distance. Let's see this little movie here. We can see this juvenile one. He grabbed a stone here. It's a short distance, a meter or less here. But from this data here, you can see that in median, juveniles transport stones to anvils in median from 5 meters, and adult males 30 meters. So we also observed, this was more important, that they transported heavier stones to crack open palm nuts than other foods such as cashew nuts. So this led us, because this was all based on naturalist observation, this led us to suggest they were capable of at least short-term planning regarding the choice of the most adequate tool. So a heavy stone for a piassava resistant nut and a small stone for a cashew nut. But then, oh my God, here, yes, it worked. Then we went to test experimentally this idea in the field, this suggestion that we made. We took advantage of this area that you see here in these pictures. This is a natural area where there are several anvil stones that the monkeys always use to crack open nuts there. And we set up our field laboratory there. We call that our field laboratory now. And we, during the time of our experiments, we attract the monkeys with water and palm nuts to the region. And for this experiment, we removed all natural hammer stones from the area and provided the monkeys with nuts and 2 or 3 stones, depending on the experimental condition that we offered. We offered natural stones and some artificial stones that we built with the collaboration of a colleague from the geology department in University of São Paulo. So we built these artificial stones that could be large but empty, and so they would be light, and small, very dense ones that would be heavy. So different from the natural stones in which size and weight are correlated. The larger the hammer stone, the heavier it is in natural stones. So we gave them natural stones, so a sandstones that cracks easily when they beat the stones, and the sealed stones that usually they use as hammers. And we provided with small and large natural stones. And then we started with the conflicting conditions, showing them, giving them the small heavy stones and the large light stones. we can see here from this graph that in all conditions with the natural stones and the artificial stones, the monkeys chose significantly, chose the functional stone significantly above expected by chance as their first choice. It was extremely interesting that when we first set up the experiment and they went straight to the large with the artificial stones, then they went to the large stone first and they grabbed to lift the stone, expect that stone to be heavy, and then it was light. So they lost their balance at the first and they were like, something is wrong. And then they went and tapped that stone, and they went to the small one and tapped. And after that, then I have to show you the short movie here. After that, they would tap for, can you see here? He's tapping the small stone, tapping the large one, and then he goes back to the small one. He already knows that was the heavy one, and he chooses the correct one. So after the first trial they were deceived by our artificial condition, they went to the correct choice, the first choice in all other experiments. So we concluded this is evidence that the monkeys perceive the affordance of the stone that make it an efficient tool. In addition, we have shown through kinematic analysis using videos of nut cracking that the monkeys also adjust their body movement according to the task demand. This was the PhD of Madhu Mangalam. Do you the movie? It's going right. The movie it's showing. We show that they crack the less resistant to coon nut. I was talking about the Orbignia, the Piassava nut, the Catoulet. These are very resistant nuts. Tucum, it's the genus Astrocarium. It's a small, rounded, much less resistant, kind of soft palm nut, and not exactly soft, but because they have to crack, but much less resistant. And so they crack this less resistant nut by striking a light stone repeatedly with moderate force, that is, by not exceeding a threshold. We can see here the black bars are the amplitude of the strike for the tucum nut, and the gray bars are for the piassava nut. So the amplitude is much higher for the piassava. So they not exceed this threshold for the tucum, and they modulate the kinematic parameters of each strike on the basis of the condition of the nut, that is, the development of the fracture following the preceding strike. So when they first hear they perceive that the nut was first fractured, they use less amplitude when cracking a tucum. In contrast, they cracked the more resistant piassava nut by striking a headstone with the maximum force that they could generate without modulating the kinematic parameters of their strikes until the nut cracked. So it's like they perceive the differences of the nuts and that they adjust their body movements in accordance. So, in summary of what I said up to now, our studies have shown that Capuchin monkeys perceive the affordances of the materials used as tools, of the nuts they will crack open, and of their body actions, and that they make at least short-term planning to achieve success with minimum cost. this body of evidence shows that these wild monkeys are cognitively different from the captive raised monkeys that I mentioned before, that were the object of that affirmation in 2004 in the complete Capuchin. We suggest that these differences are the result of their development, of the development of these wild monkeys within the tradition of tool use. So I will show you that using stone hammers in Boa Vista is a challenging task. Hammer stones weigh on average almost 1.2 kilos, which is the weight. See here, I'm not talking about this work, but we weighed these monkeys for 13 years from a very young, so we have their weight during their development since they are very tiny. And here we show in red the females, in blue the males, and we can see a stone of 1.2 kilos. See here is a 3 years old female. She's already almost an adult female. So a stone like that is the weight of an adult female. Some stones weigh twice a female. That a male can hold a fork, even a female. We saw one female lifting a 4 kilos stones once. So it's a very demanding task. It's hard. And it takes immatures. Here we show more or less, this is proficiency in nut cracking, and here is the age in months. So it's more or less with 5-6 years that they are reaching proficiency, finally reaching proficiency in this task. So the immatures we see here, Romeo, he's nut cracking, trying to nut crack, trying. So the immatures like Romeo, they must master how to hold the hammer stone, how to position the nut. But ultimately, what we show is that proficiency is best explained by the decrease of these random behaviors that you see. Here he's doing the right behavior, but then he starts to tap to beat the nut on the stone, and he turns, and with age, and they decrease more and more these silly behaviors, and this is related to the increase in proficiency. It's like they become more focused in what is really important for success. But this is achieved by individual practice with the material, the stones, and the nuts over the years. So is this individual learning? I will now show how the development of tooling skills in immature capuchins is directly and indirectly affected by the actions of others. In other words, is socially mediated. These are the results of 2.5 years study following 15 individuals younger than 6 years old by a team of 4 researchers in 2 pairs. One observer registering the behavior of the focal immature, and the other registering the neighbors, the activity of neighbors within 10 meters radius. This is the PhD of Yonat Eschar. This method allowed us to analyze the focal monkey's behavior with nuts and stones and its presence near embryos in relation to the start, continuation, and end of cracking by other members of the group. We have shown that, I will show the little movies as just to illustrate on what I'm showing in the graphs. We have shown that the immatures manipulate nuts and the nut debris more often when they can see and hear others of other members of the group nut cracking. See here, these gray bars show when there's a nut cracking activity in the group. So they they manipulated more these nuts and debris when there is activity in the group, and it's the opposite with other objects. They manipulate less when there is activity of nut cracking in the group. Then we also show that they manipulate, this is Romeo again, they manipulate nuts and debris more often when they are near an anvil. Here, more when they are near an anvil than when they are away. Again, it's the opposite with other objects, even in the absence of others. So the artifacts also affect their practice. And finally, we have also shown that the immatures stay near an anvil more often when there is activity on others are nut cracking than when there is no nut cracking activity. We can see here, even near. In fact, I will show later that they are not, the adults are not super tolerant of the others when they are nut cracking, but see how close Acerola is of her mother, Amora is of her mother here. And so they stay more near the anvil when there is practice. So in conclusion, both the actual observation of the activity of others and the artifacts of this activity, the nut leftovers and stones, facilitate the practice of percussing nuts and stones from a very early age in Fazenda Boa Vista. Artifacts left behind when cracking nuts facilitated the practice by immatures, and the adults cracking at those sites draw their attention to these artifacts. Recently, we have shown that the older the monkeys get, what I'm showing here is the reuse of stones previously used by a conspecific. And they have shown that this reuse also increases with age. The older the monkeys get, the more they reuse the stones previously used by a conspecific. So we suggest that for capuchins, the stones acquire their true value with the practice. This was the PhD of Andrés Ballesteros Ardia, and I want to show you this movie of a very young one, Olivia. She just threw the functional stone. She's very young. So an adult used that stone, and then she goes there and she throws that one and she starts to play with the nuts. And in a while she will play with the sandstone. See, she grabs the sandstones and starts to play. And soon others will come here and do the same. So when they are older, then they will start to really reuse the functional stone. Finally, we show that the tradition of nut cracking with stones in Fazenda Boa Vista affects learning processes by influencing memory and attention of younger monkeys. When others, we see here in this red bar, the first red bar, when others start to crack nuts, the youngsters immediately start to manipulate and percuss nuts. But what is important, they sustain this behavior for longer after the nut cracking ends. Here we can see 1 minute after, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, even 8 minutes after the end of this activity, there is still one or other immature manipulating nuts and stones. And this is significantly different from other foods that they manipulate. So social influence on learning affects not only what's learned, but the learning process itself. Just a little movie. So here is Jatobá, a former dominant male. He just cracked, he ate already, now he's leaving, and Presente. So Presente, at that time, a young juvenile, he's now, he left the group, he's a grown up already. He starts to manipulate and there is some other young crying, and he starts to purpose the nut. Again, there's no activity anymore. See, no sound of nut cracking, just others crying, and he stays there. Now here. So nut cracking has other consequences on the life of these capuchin monkeys. It enhances competition for food sources, what is evident by the decreased tolerance of dominant females towards subordinates in two sides. Here I'm showing this association index between pairs of individuals of females of different ranking or high ranking, high middle ranking, the different diets, and in fruit trees, in palm trees, and in the two sides. And we can see here for both studied group, the unprovisioned and the provision, the association index between females is significantly lower in two sides compared to the other food sites, even usurpable food sites that the individuals can monopolize. And this is related also to an increased contest competition. We see more direct, not actual aggression, but formal, but we see direct competition in two sides, much more than it would be expected by the time they spend there. And this is probably related to the rigid linear female dominance hierarchy, very stable over the years, that we observed in Fazenda Boa Vista, and what is very different from what we observe in my other study populations in Atlantic forest, where dominance relations between females are almost absent. They are almost egalitarian. So there are loose dominance relations in these populations that do not use tools. So we suggest that to use increase the linearity of the dominance hierarchy, so affects the social structure of the group. And in fact, we found a similar effect of decreased spatial association when comparing the spatial association of the entire group, not only females, including the males of all ages. We use the same database of 2.5 years we compiled for the study of Yonet on the development of tool use, that we had the data on the identity of immatures and the neighbors, and we were able to build the association networks considering the activity, nut cracking or others, and location on end view or outside the end views. We built the association networks, and we saw that the association networks during nut cracking on end views were less dense and more modular than during other activities in other locations. So if this is such a difficult food source to obtain that increases the possibility of getting aggressed, it's hard to acquire, why the monkeys are so attracted to it. We have just shown that the kernel of palm nuts obtained with the aid of tools significantly increases the diet quality of capuchin monkeys in Fazenda Boa Vista. This was published last year. Using a nutritional ecology study based on daily focal follows of individual monkeys, that was the PhD of my student Lucas Peternelli dos Santos, we compared days when the monkeys used tools to crack open palm nuts versus days when they did not use tools. On days when they crack open palm nuts with tools, they acquired higher levels of fat, carbohydrate, and energy. this is here, lower levels of, I would say non-diet is not correct, but it's easier to understand. They ingested lower levels of non-digestible fibers when they use tools than when they do not use tools, and these fibers decrease the absorption of nutrients, and they also acquired a more balanced diet in terms of the ratio between the non-protein energy intake and protein ingested on days when they use tools versus the days that when they did not use tools. So tool use did not increase diet, the amount of food, not increase diet quantity, but increased their diet quality. So in summary, what we learned from these wild Capuchin monkeys from Fazenda Boa Vista is that tool use is a tradition that emerges in populations that rely on extractive foraging coupled with ecological contexts that favor manipulation and practice with tool materials. This is a skill acquired through a long process of practice that is stimulated by the activity of skilled conspecific and by the artifacts of this activity. Tool use has important consequences for the life of these capuchins. It contributes substantially to improve their diet, and as such a rich source, it increases within group competition for food, affecting patterns of sociality. Finally, I think our findings may illuminate causes and consequences of tool use in ancestral hominins. For a long time, tool use and tool making were considered a feature of the genus Homo, and it has been linked to brain growth, and its social and life history correlates, and the increase in meat eating. We now have sufficient evidence of tool use in hominins much prior to the genus Homo, and perhaps even tool making, as we can see in this just published paper in Science. They are showing these two sites in Kenya of the genus Paranthropus, and these sites are dated almost 3 million years ago. So this is really, really an old tool use, and perhaps even tool making that they were using to extract bone marrow. So to understand the evolution of these tool use as a feeding adaptation that predates the appearance of the genus Homo, of course, it's important to study the living apes, as Mike did, with the chimpanzees in Tanzania, as a case of common ancestry. But it's also important to study the more distant, robust Capuchin monkeys that offer a possibility to study a convergence. The appearance of tool use in distant clades allow us to search for factors associated to this feature. For example, our results on the nutritional significance of tools for capuchins suggest using natural stone tools in feeding may have improved the diet quality of hominins much prior to the appearance of Homo, and maybe also may be associated to this cascade of related social consequences that are now attributed to the genus Homo. So I think this is an important, an additional importance contribution of our study. And with that, I end my talk. I would like to thank you again a lot for this invitation to be here. I thank all the funding agencies that made this long-term study possible, the permits and all the students, as I said, the laboratory. And if you have other questions after today, you can contact me here. Thank you very much. Can I stop sharing?
Sure, or you can just leave it as is. It's up to you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for fascinating lecture, Dr. Izar. So we have plenty of time for questions and answers from the Zoom audience. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, as I said, please feel free to add your questions to the chat board. Those of you who are on Zoom, you're welcome to turn on your microphone and ask questions.
Thanks a lot, Pat. That was beautiful. Really, really nice.
Thank you, Matt.
Maybe I can start. So you talked about the nutritious gains that these Capuchin monkeys get from processing the nuts. I'm also wondering about sort of a health benefits, if you will. I guess you could talk about exercise physiology aspect of this behavior, because these hammer stones are pretty heavy, considering the body weights of the Capuchin monkeys. So have you been looking at that? I guess the effects of using heavy stone tools on the physiology of these monkeys.
On the physiology, no.
Yes, yes.
For this study on the nutritional ecology, we estimated the energy expenditure using tools. You know, all those formulas we have to estimate metabolic costs of all the activities of non-human primates are based on values we have for human metabolism. So we chose the most that we had available, the most metabolic costly human activity that we found, that was swimming. So we estimated the cost. Perhaps we are even overestimating the cost of the activity of the nut cracking, because we used for the entire day. So when they use tools, we estimated that they have this extra cost of the extractive foraging, you know, but we don't know exactly. We know that when we had at least the first dominant male of the group, Chicão, he got very old from his appearance, his teeth, and he had his fingers hurt, but still he was using tools. We have another former dominant male that was defeated in a male takeover, a huge fight, and he lost one foot in this fight.
Oh.
But he survived. It was amazing, and he's still capable of lifting the stones and nut cracking. So I don't know. Perhaps if we are able to collect their skeletons, we could find something about their
bone development and muscle development. And
yes.
Yeah.
But we really don't have this type of data.
In that respect, it would be interesting to compare the non-tool using species of this genus with these guys to see how it really could influence muscle connectivity and all those things that show up in the bones, and then use that for models to predict whether other species were in hominid evolution, if they were more prone to tool use or less prone. You know, some of those kinds of things we could find a lot out, perhaps from that kind of a study.
But with the with these general measures of different populations, we have a work with Kristen and Bartwright, and in fact, this species, and they use skeletons that we found in Fazenda Boa Vista. They are kind of smaller and lighter than the negritos that occurs in the Atlantic forest and do not use tools. So the negritos is heavier and with more muscles and heavier bones. So it's like the tools allow them to be lighter.
Huh.
That's
Interesting.
the idea. That's the idea.
Okay.
So, but they are really Elisabetta Wieselberg, she likes to say that they are the Hercules of the primates, because it's amazing. It's amazing to see them really weighing these very heavy stones.
Yeah.
So, but they do this. I did not show this to you, but it's not super often that they do this. When in scanned samples is a small amount of time that they dedicate to crack opening, and as you could see, there are days when they do not use tools. So perhaps they do not suffer a lot for such an effort, because they do this very for a small amount of time in their lives. But also we hypothesized, because for males, we have this other study on stress, on testosterone and glucocorticoid hormones of males in the stable hierarchy, and we can show that the dominant males are really stressed in this species, and they are the ones that crack the most, that use more. So it's perhaps using tools is something that make their life easier, since they are so stressed. We have this idea that perhaps for them the palm nuts that they obtain, the kernel of palm nuts they obtain with the used tools, is very important for their health.
Cool.
Interesting. Melanie, you came on screen, you had a question. I know you're looking at something that could be related to this. Please. Yeah,
so I'm not in this field, so forgive me if this is kind of a naive question. But it was a really interesting talk, and I paused on this comment that you had made about convergent evolution, that the monkeys had split off so far away. And I'm wondering, because there are other species even further away that use tools, like octopuses do, sea otters, like even some birds and crows. Is there some similarity about how this is developing? Have you tried to look across these kind of very different species to see if there's a commonality?
I don't know about octopus, but like for corvids, for example, I think that this social influence is not so significant as we see in primates. Although now we know that tool use is much more pervasive in non-human species than we used to think. Non-human primates are more flexible, let's say, in this tool use and invent more different forms of tools, and like that population that I mentioned, Serra da Capivara, that is studied by other Brazilian group. They are, because in Boa Vista they use hammerstones to crack open hard foods. This is their tool use. In Serra da Capivara they use stone tools to dig, to cut, and they also use sticks as probes. So it's interesting. They are super creative in the way they use tools. And primates are more like that. Even so, I think we have so I think the difference would be the social mediation, but in all of these species we see learning through individual practice. So this is a commonality. We also see differences with corvids, for example. some studies favor the necessity hypothesis. So it seems that they use more tools when they need more food. So I think we don't have a common rule, but it's always related to exploitation and availability of items for extractive foraging. I think this we could say. Although if you count all those things that building and construction, then this would be different. But there is also some polemics if you classify that as two, you know.
Thanks.
Thank you for your question.
I have a question, if it's okay for me to ask. I don't see any other students in the chat, but yeah, that's really fascinating. And I always love these stories of Capuchins using tools. But one question I maybe have is sometimes there's a lot of interest in being able to understand whether the Capuchins or other animals not only can use tools or sometimes manufacture them, but understand how they work. And so we have this folk physics idea, right? Like people, we use tools that we don't understand as well quite often, but somebody understands how they work, right? So I know that for Capuchins in the lab, there have been studies with those T-shaped plastic apparatus where they use a stick to pull some food, but they don't seem to understand when you change the conditions so that pulling the food ends up dropping into a trap, that they need to change their strategy. So they're very mimetic in a way that they like to social learn, as you mentioned, and they have all that experience with trial and error and copying others. But from your experience, how much, and you showed some interesting experiments where the Capuchins can figure out the quality of the rocks when you made them much lighter than they expected and puts them off balance. So they start to inspect the tool. So they have some idea of like what appropriateness means for those tools. But I wonder if you could maybe comment more on whether Capuchins understand the mechanism of what they're doing in addition to being able to copy others.
You know, if Elisa was here, she would say they are not able to copy others.
Yes, I'm probably using the wrong language. I know in social learning.
No, not the wrong word, because really what happens when they are learning, it's what I was trying to show. They are attracted to that activity. They are, first of all, the youngs, after the nut cracking, when they can grab little pieces of the nut. So that place, that materials, that activity becomes associated to this super nice food. They love nuts and it's super rich. So that place becomes attractive because of that. They also enjoy. Did you see that large movie that I show Olivia? They loved, and I end that movie quickly because the youngsters, they stay there for long, play with the nuts and with the stones, and they enjoy percussing and manipulating. And they are manipulating that things because it was associated to that tasteful food. It's also associated to something. Sometimes I think they think it's really cool because when the dominant male is cracked, or when an adult is cracking, the juveniles stay close, and it's like it's a contagious, you know, they do exactly the same movement with their bodies, but outside the embryo, they replicate. It's like when you yawn and I yawn. But then they go and they remember when I showed Romeo, and then they start to do silly things. So they will have to learn by practicing. But what we think happens, we don't have data on neuroimaging, nothing like that. But from their behavior compared to other populations and especially to the captive monkeys, we think that, and we based all these in the action perception theory, and we think that they start to have, I don't know if they know, but they perceive what is important in that stone to crack open the nut. So I think that choice is perfect, and the how do you say, when what happened is not what they were expecting. They had expectations when they were lifting the stone, and they tapped to perceive the weight of the stone. So I think they really, but it's a very specific super knowledge about this task and these stones, at least for this population. And I think it's because I chose those pictures for you to see that the baby on the back of the mother, they are already being submitted, their bodies experiencing the movements. So it's all about, and I think this is also, I didn't talk about it, but I think this is also important to understand learning in humans, because we also, sometimes we think we have this reasoning before, and we see the problem and we know the solution just by thinking, not acting, not in.
Yeah.
I think this age of apps and all these gadgets, I think we all learn like a Capuchin how to use. At least me.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, is there any more questions for Dr. Izar from the Zoom audience? Any comment? If not, this is probably a good place to stop the live streaming. So please give another applause to Dr. Izar.